Lisa, Ellison Cooper, how are you? Did I say
Hello.
Ellison Cooper?
You did.
Lisa Cooper. Is that right? No, it's
It's Lisa Cooper
it's
Ellison.
Lisa Cooper Ellison. I knew that was wrong. Hi. I just think of
Hi.
you as Lisa.
And that's how I see myself. It's
And
so
I
good to
got to
see
tell
you.
you, man, I am loving your gray hair. I didn't realize how wavy and curly it was. It's gorgeous.
Thank you. You know, it's funny. Like I had worn my hair straight for a really long time, even though this is just my natural look.
Yeah.
And since I've done this, I have gotten more compliments on my hair. And it's
Yes.
funny because I was afraid that if I went gray, I would look old. And, all of these messages that we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm fabulous now. I love this.
Yes. And it's less expensive, isn't it?
Gosh, so much less.
So wait, I have to show you something. Are you ready for this? I'm going to share my screen.
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Can you see this?
Yes.
This is HuffPost Personal. This is right now. And here is your essay. My 20-year-old brother died by suicide. Here's why I almost joined him. And then two down, it's my essay.
Yes.
A white woman told me she didn't think of me as Black. Here's how I reacted. So we are sharing the same HuffPost screen, which I think is so cool. That's never happened to me before. I'm going to stop my share now, but I just wanted to show you that I think it's so awesome. And I had the absolute pleasure of reading your essay. I've actually read it to myself before it was published, but I got to read it for on my nightstand. And I was telling you before we started recording, the idea of how suicide impacts a family was something I had never thought about before in the way that you express it in this essay. It really made me think, and it hit me differently than other things I've read about suicide. And this is the last Friday of Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. So I wanted to make sure. I'm so glad it was published this week so that I could get it out to our listeners today. Can you tell me a little bit about the essay and what prompted you to write it?
Yeah. So, the essay is part of a memoir that I have been working on for quite a while. And I wanted to get something out there for National Suicide Prevention Week. And because this is an issue that we really, really need to talk about. Suicide has been on the rise since my brother died in 1997. It continues to go up. And, when I was thinking about suicide, my brother's death has been this huge issue in my life, but he wasn't the only person that I lost. I had lost 3 friends before my brother, and I have lost other people since then. And what I really thought about is, how do we grieve? How do we grieve, and do we have permission to grieve? And what happens when we don't have permission to grieve? Because that was part of what ended up happening to me, is that my brother's death was this huge thing in our family. And there were all of these people who seemed like they had greater permission to grieve, that their grief was more important, that it was worse. And I think that, even if you haven't dealt with suicide, we have these ways that we give ourselves these messages of like, well, yes, this hurts for me, but look at what they're going through. Look what their pain is like.
Right.
And, when we shut our own pain down, there are tremendous consequences. And in my case, shutting my pain down and really trying to overcompensate for the loss of my brother almost ended my life. I really think about what it was like to be on that parking garage and be thinking about suicide and not even realizing I was thinking about it.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't sad. I wasn't having some huge emotional crisis. And it was just like, oh, this seems like a really good idea. And let's think about all of these very logical things that would allow this to happen.
Yeah.
And when
I got to say that was kind of
Mhm.
startling to read. When I realized, and you do it's in such a clever way in the essay, because the reader is with you, like, oh yeah, planning these angles, that makes sense. What for again? And then you realize what you're actually planning. It's like, oh no. And then I don't want to give anything away, but
Mhm.
there's you take a next step, which actually brings you in a different direction.
Yes.
Instead of actually proceeding with the plans that you were thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It really, and when you just said a moment ago, that you had lost other people, and I was nodding before you were saying other people in your life, I was thinking that you were talking about your parents, who I know you didn't lose in that way, but that was really the loss that struck me, was how altered they were as a result of your brother's suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that you just illustrated so well. It was heartbreaking. And I could feel that, you know?
Oh yeah. And it's still heartbreaking to me, and I was, speaking with my parents about it. I think that it took me a really long time to even realize how much I grieved that loss, the loss of my parents, that they are not the same. And they will admit fully that they are not the same. And, I think that's true of anyone who loses a child, that it just fundamentally alters you in a certain way, that, there is a piece of you that dies with your child. And for the children who are left behind, there's this kind of secret, silent grief that happens that we don't really talk about. And I didn't even talk about it. I would talk about the fact that I lost my brother and how sad I was and all of the feelings I had, which were often very complicated because suicide loss is so complicated. And yet I never talked about the fact that, and I also grieved my parents, who are not the same.
Right. Yeah. So the woman, and this is the last, I want people to listen to this and to read it and to fall in love with it the way I did. But the course of action that you take puts you in contact with a woman who shows you a different perspective eventually, right? You meet with her for a number of years.
Yes.
Is there anything in particular that she did that you might offer to other people who have people that are contemplating suicide in their lives? Is there anything that she did or said that you found was like, wow, this is really helpful?
She did two things that I think were really important. And if you're worried about someone who might be contemplating suicide, or if you're worrying about this yourself, this is what you want to look for, is that she just listened.
Yes.
She didn't try to fix my problem in the moment. She just said, I'm here and I want to listen. And in doing that, she opened the door for me to be able to talk about my pain. And she also, this is an important thing too. I think that when someone says that they're thinking about suicide, it can be really scary for people. And so then what happens is that fear creates this big reaction of having to take charge and fix a situation. And that can be really scary to someone who's contemplating suicide. And so she just calmly put away these papers. She had all of this there was things that were supposed to happen. And she just said, I'm here. I want to listen and tell me your story. And that's
beautiful.
Really the biggest thing you can do for anyone, is just be there and listen.
In so many other cases as well.
Yes.
And I can think of many times in my personal life where that would have been really helpful and it didn't happen. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. It's a stunning essay. It really is. And it's as evidenced by the fact that it's on this national platform and millions of people are reading your work and benefiting from your experience. And just like me, disappearing into your work. I told you that when I read it, I disappeared into it, and I was not reading it to sound good. I was just reading it as it was written, and it's so beautiful. It carried me along. So thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share it and for just being you, and really looking forward to your memoir when it is published, because I know that it'll contain more themes like this and just so important to read. I'll be first in line for my signed copy.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura. It is such a joy to be with you. And I am in awe of all that you do. So thank you. It's truly my honor. Truly my honor.
Thank you. My brother's suicide was the lead headline in our hometown newspaper. He died at 20 in the middle of a mental health crisis. Over the past 2 days, we'd screamed, why? And how could this happen? And this can't be real. Riddled with shock, we sat in the dark and declined food
as if missing meals and ignoring sunsets would bring Joe back to us. Over the next 2 weeks, I searched my parents' eyes for the spark of life they'd once emitted, but they'd permanently dimmed. My mom cried that losing anything else would kill her. Dad told me to remember Joe the way he was. At 22, I nodded and looked away, not yet aware that an equally crushed part of me mourned, not just for my brother, but for a part of my parents I'd also lost. Even if I'd known, that grief would have felt unjustified. After what felt like hours, a pert blonde with a pixie cut and a flowered jumper called me to her office. She was just a few years older than me. Over the next 30 minutes, she asked a series of questions in her twangy southern drawl. When I told her about my brother in the parking garage, she swallowed hard. "Do you have any experience dealing with suicide?" I asked. "Have you ever been in a place where you felt like you had nothing to lose?" My throat clenched around the word lose. She set her file aside, then sat next to me. We sat like that until time was up. She was only supposed to see me for 7 sessions, but she treated me for the next 2 years. In them, I unraveled the stories I've been telling myself. For years, I believed there was a hierarchy of grief. As the daughter who'd left, the sister who'd missed the signs, and the child who couldn't put her parents back together again, I believed my pain belonged on the bottom rung. At the time, my husband's band was touring Europe. Fearing what might happen if I lost him too, I joined his tour. Every day I tried to live, not because I wanted to, but because our family was gearing up for another loss. 6 months after my brother's death, metastatic colon cancer claimed my grandfather. When I'd visited him during the Thanksgiving before Joe's suicide, it seemed like he might rally. But seeing my brother's casket had taken away his fight. Half orphaned and more broken, my mother seemed smaller still. What if she stopped fighting too? The day we buried my grandfather, I decided I would live not just my life, but also Joe's. Maybe if I was good enough, hardworking enough, and smart enough, people would see us as more than headlines and statistics. Maybe they focus on our healing and not what happened to my brother.